All right, we are live. Hello, everybody. Sorry about that. We're a little late. Was rushing around here, had a few technical glitches, and so I'm sorry to take so long, but we are live. And if you don't mind, put a comment in the chat there and let me know where you're coming in from. We're going to talk today about the speech, or well, press conference that Donald Trump just gave at Mara Lago a few minutes ago. And he was uh, extremely forceful, I would say, in doubling down on his positions that he's already taken before. There wasn't a lot of new information, so to speak, in his speech, but he definitely doubled down on his positions. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why Trump does this sort of thing where he makes these really outlandish positions. The best part of the whole press conference was where Trump said that he was going to rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. You can just hear all of Trump's supporters going, myself included. Going to rename it to the Gulf of America. Well, okay, let's do that. Let's rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, because by George, America's got more land on that Gulf than Mexico does. Why not? But I'm sure that there are leaders from around the world who are right now running around with their hair on fire, trying to figure out what they're going to do about this new president if he actually tries to accomplish the things that he says he's going to accomplish. Now, I would bet my retirement plan that during the next 4 years, Donald Trump will not take over Greenland, retake the Panama Canal, or rename the Gulf of Mexico. I would bet my fortune on that. However, there's something that Trump is really, really good at. I've been doing some reading on this and some research on this, and I think that there's a real genius to his craziness, and I want to talk a little bit about that just to sort of frame the debate. What I really want to talk about in this live is Trump's assertion that all hell will break out if the Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad do not release the hostages that they have by the time Trump gets into office on the 20th of January. And I almost hope they don't, because I just want to see what he would do. You know, if you think about it, we've never actually seen Donald Trump send military forces into any place, except when he dropped a bomb on Qasem Soleimani. And that was good. That was good. It was a good day. So I want to just actually, there's a name for the way that Trump negotiates. I didn't realize this, so I started reading about it. It's called anchoring. I think in Trump's case, we could safely call it extreme anchoring. Let me explain what that is. So when somebody goes into a negotiation, there's an expectation by the buyer and the seller. I mean, for example, if you look up a car that's for sale in the newspaper and the guy wants $5,500 for it. Well, the reason he's put $5,500 in the paper is that he really wants $5,000 for it. And he wants to leave himself a little bit of room to negotiate. and he knows that you're going to come in and say $4,500, and then he's going to say, well, how about 5250, and you say, well, what about 4750, and then you both agree on 5,000, and away you go. That's the framing of the negotiation. Well, Trump's forte throughout his career has been in framing the negotiation a little differently by anchoring it outside of the expected norm. So what he would do in that case is he'd come in and he'd say, this car is a piece of junk. I'll give you $500, and that's the most I will pay for it. And the seller would go like, "What are you talking about? It's a $5,000 car. And Trump would say, no, I'm not giving you more than $500. That is a piece of junk. It's a terrible car, and I'm not going to pay more than $500 for it." And he would frame that debate on a much wider scale. So if they eventually end up agreeing to pay $3,000 or $3,500, the seller's going to actually feel like he dodged a bullet, like he got a great deal, because for a while there, Trump would have had him afraid that he's going to only get $500 for that car. That's Trump's strategy. Now, this extreme anchoring starts with an outlandish position. You state a position or make a demand that's extreme and way outside of what you ultimately expect to achieve, but also way outside of what the other side expects to achieve. And what that does is sets a psychological anchor and influences the other party's expectation of what a reasonable settlement would look like. Then what you do is you create it's called a contrast effect. So after your extreme opening, your eventual concessions or I don't know, counter offers will seem more reasonable by comparison to your initial goal, but they'll be far more favorable to you than you would have gotten otherwise. And again, make the other party feel like they're getting a better deal than you made them think they were going to get at the beginning. Then, so you're shifting the negotiation frame, anchoring high or low. Now, I gave you an example with cars. If you did it with a house, you'd be like, if somebody wants $500,000 for their house, you'd come in and you'd say, oh, I'll give you 200,000 max for that. There's no way this is getting 500. This is terrible. It's in a terrible neighborhood. And you just talk about it. Where you really see this is if you try to buy anything in the old city of Jerusalem. You go in and the merchants in the old city expect, they're number one, they're masters at this kind of anchoring. And they expect you to be as well, or else you're going to get ripped off. So you go in and you say, hey, there's a nice little, rug I'd like to have in my entryway. How much for this rug? And the guy says, $500. And you go, what? $500? Are you insane? $500? You had in your mind when you saw the rug that maybe $25 or something would be what that. You're like, what's that thing made of? Oh, my friend, it's a camel silk. It's whatever. And all of a sudden, your whole idea of the value of this thing has been reframed. So if you really want that rug and you end up getting it for $100, whoo, you think, man, I got this $500 rug for $100. I got a pretty good deal. When in reality, that guy probably bought that rug for $15 and probably would have taken 25 if you had said, no, there's no way. Okay. Now, there are some risks to this, especially when applied to nations. And the risks are something that Donald Trump doesn't seem to either get or perhaps just not care about. And that is, I mean, if you're negotiating with the merchant in the marketplace and there's a price tag on something for $100 and you come in and you'll say, I'll give you $10 for that piece of junk. You risk offending him to the point where he throws you out of his store. If that happens, not such a bad deal because, I mean, it's not such a huge deal because there's a lot of other stores and you can just go down to the next store down and try again. However, when you're negotiating with nation states, uh, things like this, offense can often lead to much worse things that will affect lots of people around the globe. So, as I said the last time I talked about this, Donald Trump trying to anchor to try to get a better deal in Panama, which there's really no such thing as a better deal in Panama. Um, I mean, I would be surprised if Trump ended up getting any kind of a better deal out of that. But in setting the bar so high with Panama, like we're going to take it back, it's just going to be ours. He's actually not just offending Panamanians, many of them, but he's putting people like me and my family at risk because we live there and we're Americans. And we're going to be seen as surrogates for Donald Trump, perhaps, when we go back. Now, one interesting thing about that is that many Panamanians, since he said that the first time, have actually agreed and said, great. said, oh, fantastic. Come take it back. That's great. We would love it because we don't see any benefit from that canal. It's only all the money from the canal goes to 4 rich families or 15 rich families or just the government or whatever. In reality, most people in Panama, about 80% of people in Panama actually benefit from the canal because the canal funds their Social Security program to a great extent and their Social Security medical program and allows them to get medical care free or very, very cheap. Now, Norm Painter is asking, vote for Trump and then make fun of him and talk against him. I don't get it. Okay, well, as I've said before, I did vote for Trump, but I am not part of the cult of Trump. It is possible for Trump to do things wrong. It is possible for Trump to overplay his hand. And it is certainly reasonable for intelligent adults to disagree. And if I was sitting with Donald Trump, I would gladly disagree with him to his face. And so if I think that Trump may have overplayed his position on Panama, for example, for various reasons, not the least of which that the President Molino in Panama, the new president there, really was excited to work with Trump and wanted to make Panama a closer ally of Donald Trump, or of America. And now he just threw that in the trash. Well, what's funny is Norm Painter coming and watching my Hot Zone podcast and then disagreeing with me and then criticizing me for disagreeing with somebody else. Look, you are completely able to have your own opinion on things. And so am I. Now, and actually on this podcast, I didn't come on here in order to disagree with Donald Trump on anything. I came on here to talk about what he has said and why he is saying it. And so the why is that Donald Trump is he's very experienced and adept at extreme anchoring. He anchors the conversation way out of bounds in order to pull his opponent toward his position. So will Trump take over Panama and Greenland and Canada and rename the Gulf of Mexico to be the Gulf of America? No, he won't. But I would venture to say he doesn't actually expect to do any of those things. Just like he probably didn't expect to make Mexico pay for the barrier between our countries in his last term. He said, we're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. And it freaked Mexico out. And it made Mexico much more willing to play ball with the United States when it came time to try to fix the immigration crisis, etc. And they did. They came around. So again, I don't get these people that just lose their minds if you say anything that sounds like Trump could possibly do something wrong. I voted for Donald Trump, but Trump can certainly do things that are wrong. And don't come here if you expect to come here and just hear a cheerleader for Donald Trump. I'm not that guy. I don't bend my knee. I don't worship any leader but Jesus Christ. I'm a citizen of the United States. I was born there. I have bled for the United States. I have fought and bled for America. And I think I have every right to criticize my leader, whether or not I voted for that guy. I have to say, though, it is kind of fun to get on Twitter after Trump makes a speech like that, because you just watch so many leftists absolutely setting their hair ablaze and getting their undies all twisted up and just freaking out over this, watching the mainstream media just go like, ah! Even listening to the speech, once he started taking questions, when he'd make a statement like that, the whole room would just erupt, and that's entertaining for sure. Although I don't like to see people argue. It was certainly entertaining to see him doing that. Now, so with Trump's extreme anchoring, he does tend to, again, in terms of policy, foreign or domestic, he tends to burn his bridges, and that certainly can be a problem. Trump is somebody who doesn't. I don't think he uh, gets offended easily, because he certainly doesn't mind offending other people, and he almost enjoys it. I mean, it seems like he enjoys watching people get their feathers ruffled over something that he says, because it makes him feel like it makes him feel powerful. There's a lot of people like that. I've known many people like that in my life. They say things just to get a rise out of people. Trump, the problem that if he faces doing this as a politician is that he tends to burn bridges. So again, he could have probably, as they say, catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar, if he had gone and sat down with President Molino, since President Molino kind of wants to be part of the cool guys club. You've got Milei from Argentina. You've got Bolsonaro. I'm sorry, Bolsonaro. You've got the president of El Salvador. You've got kind of all these sort of conservative, I won't say conservative, right wing, let's say, leaders that are coming to power across the Western Hemisphere and even in Europe. Because a lot of people are tired of all the craziness from the left. And President Molino of Panama, I think, really kind of wanted to join that club. He wanted to be part of that. Well, this certainly didn't help. It might be effective at getting some sort of concession out of Panama. The reason, first of all, let me just, for those of you that don't know, look, what do I mean by setting an extreme opening position? What do I mean by anchoring in terms of what Trump was saying in his speech? Well, let's break down, just for example, what he's saying about Panama. He says that the United States built the Panama Canal at the cost of 38,000 American lives. Well, that's patently untrue. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of the people who died building or working in Panama, building a canal, not the American canal, not the Panama Canal that we have today, but a different canal, were under the French attempt to do so before the Americans got involved. So the French tried to build a canal in Panama, and they failed. And they failed largely because they lost 22,000 men in the process, mostly to yellow fever. Those men died digging a canal, much of which is being used as a fishing pond today near Panama City. Now, a very small portion of that original French canal was used as kind of a starting point for the American canal, but the vast majority of the American canal was not built by the French. So those 22,000 dead really died in a boondoggle for that ended up amounting to almost nothing. Trump is including those 22,000 in the 38,000 number. It's actually about 36,000 that actually died in both of those attempts. Now, the United States took over trying to build a canal across Panama, and in 11 or whatever it was. And during the time the United States was digging the canal, about 5,700 people died. Of those 5,700 people, only 350 of them were Americans. So Donald Trump is setting an extreme opening position with Panama by literally lying about the number of people the number of Americans who died building the canal. Okay, that's what he chooses to do. He also said that the United States, it was the most expensive building project in history in this press conference that he just gave. He reiterated that multiple times. He said this was the most expensive building project in history. Well, actually, that's not anywhere close to true. As a matter of fact, it is not even within a tenth of being true. The Panama Canal cost about 317, if I remember that right, $317 million to build back in the early 20th century. In today's dollars, that would come out to about $4 billion. Well, the International Space Station, by comparison, cost $122 billion. Okay. There are bridges and buildings around the world that have cost more than $4 billion to build in today's dollars. So no, it wasn't the most expensive building project in history. But again, this sets the tone for any eventual negotiation with Panama. He also says that Panama is overcharging the United States, or charging the United States more than it charges other countries. That is patently untrue. Panama charges by weight. They don't charge by the country. They charge by the tonnage that is on the ship that is going through the canal. And they charge the same amount to everybody, but it is the price is affected by supply and demand. It is has mostly lately been affected. The prices have gone up a lot because Panama was in a drought, and it uses fresh water from a giant man-made lake in the interior of the country. That's the way the United States built it. And it uses about 150 million gallons of water for every ship that goes through the canal. And so if there's a dearth of rain, I mean, truly that canal runs on rain. And so if there's not enough rain, then they have to scale back the number of ships that can cross. And just due to the law of supply and demand, the price being bid on for the ships that go across goes up. One ship in particular bid like $4 million to go across because it needed to go across immediately and it needed to jump the line. But Panama just sets the rates, and it's a bidding. It's like they put crossings on a maritime version of eBay, and anybody that wants to just bids on it. That's how the prices are set. They don't charge based on the nation that owns the ship. On that note, America owns very few ships that go through the canal. The vast majority of the ships that go through the canal are owned by other countries, and they're neither owned by nor flagged in the United States. So the shipping going through the canal, much of it ends up bringing cargo to or from the United States. And the cost of going through the canal certainly affects the cost of the products that end up at our shores. And that's probably what Donald Trump means when he says that, it's costing America way too much. But it doesn't have anything to do with Panama charging too much. Panama is charging what it always charges. It's set by a system of bidding, and everybody just bids. So if he's trying to make the case that the United States should pay less than everybody else, that's going to be a tough case to make. And so I just don't see the benefit in this. I think it's something that Trump kind of got into his head, and he's just doing what he always does, setting an extreme position to begin with, so that when or if there are some eventual negotiations, he can have that starting point to start from and pull his opponent towards his position. And so I'm not condemning him for that. I think that ultimately Trump's ability to negotiate will be very good for America, much, much better than Biden's feckless foreign policy. And I think that the reason why he has developed this persona of being bombastic and brash and arrogant and even rude is that it's how he gets business done. And he has always treated politics like a business, treats everything like a business. He's a very transactional person, and that's okay. So his confidence and persistence in those, even in his extreme positions, makes them seem less outlandish and more plausible, because he's just like, well, of course, we're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico to be the Gulf of America. Of course. Of course, we're going to take over Greenland. Do you know Greenland actually changed their coat of arms the other day to highlight, to make more prominent the symbolism in the coat of arms that symbolize Greenland. Uh, I guess that's how they're going to kind of push back on what Trump is saying. Whatever. uh, but yeah. Now, the other reason I think that Trump takes these extreme positions is that he knows how to dominate the media cycle. He is, even though most in the mainstream media absolutely hate Donald Trump because I think they take him far too seriously, uh, his ability to dominate the media cycle, and just be right on the top of the fold in every paper across the country every day is something of a superpower in a way. It's free publicity for what he wants to say. It allows him to communicate with the entire planet in a way that other presidents can't, or at least won't. His negotiating is as a showman. That theatrical style that he employs makes his extreme positions more palatable because they're simply more expected. All of the craziness is already baked into the cake with Donald Trump, and he people expect him to say crazy things, and so they go, oh, yep, there he goes. He's going to rename the Gulf of Mexico. Hey, Ethel, did you hear? Here, Trump's going to rename Mexico now. Whatever. It's kind of like in the movie Tommy Boy, if you remember that movie. My kids used to love that movie. When Tommy Boy goes around selling brake pads all across America on his great road trip, and then eventually it just kind of all falls apart, and he's about to lose his company, and so he pretends to strap a vest with dynamite on his chest and runs into a bank, and says, he ends up in a sort of standoff with the police, and they bring the press in and they start showing him on television with this vest on, and he's running around yelling in this bank, and it's on TV, and they show one of the CEOs of one of the corporations that had bought some brake pads from him sitting on his couch reading the newspaper, and his wife says, "Honey, look at this human bomb on TV." And he puts his paper down and he squints and he goes, "Oh yeah, I buy brake pads from that guy." And he goes back to reading his newspaper because he's just not surprised. After meeting Tommy Boy and spending, an hour with Tommy Boy, you wouldn't be surprised if you saw him on TV. And Trump is like a little more polished version of Tommy Boy as president. And personally, I'm looking forward to seeing what he can accomplish over the next 4 years. Now, I'm not excited about what's going to happen in terms of his relationship with Panama. I'm not excited to go back and see if people are absolutely losing their minds over this. I know they are, some people in Panama. Like I said, I was surprised when he first came out with this whole thing about Panama, how many people actually were for it. And there are actually a lot of people in Greenland too who are saying, this is fantastic. I just made a piece. I mean, you would think that Donald Trump's statements during the campaign about ending the war in Ukraine by forcing the Ukrainians to accept a deal that would almost look like losing, or at least some of the things he said, or that his people said, almost looked that way. It would seem that maybe the Ukrainians would not be so excited about Donald Trump becoming president. But when I was there a few weeks ago, I was surprised. Most of the Ukrainians I spoke to were either ambivalent or excited about Donald Trump becoming the US president and doing something about the war in Ukraine. I think they actually hope that Donald Trump will employ some of his craziness against Vladimir Putin and pull Vladimir Putin a little closer to a reasonable position in terms of ending that war. Now, what was their position? Well, I mean, Donald Trump has said that a negotiated settlement is the only way to end the war in Ukraine, and we need it sooner rather than later. He said that in his speech today. He was like, I wish I could go. He said, I'm not going to go meet with Putin or Zelensky or anything until I'm actually in office. I wish I could go before that, but it just wouldn't be right. But, you know, because it wouldn't be right because he wouldn't actually be the president yet. He's actually undermining Joe Biden as it is by speaking out on all these things and saying what he's about to do. He's undermining Joe Biden's ability to govern, but seeing as how Joe Biden really doesn't have any ability to govern in the first place, and Joe Biden is also doing everything he can to undermine Donald Trump's eventual presidency by giving away the store, trying to auction off the building materials for the wall, making deals, sending tons of money to Ukraine, to Israel, to everybody else, Africa. He also has apparently banned oil drilling offshore of the United States, trying to, shut down more of the energy sector here in the US before Trump gets in. He's doing everything he can to try to throw sand into the gears for the Trump presidency. So turnabout's fair play. If Trump is fighting that, then bravo, more power to Donald Trump. But when I talked to the people in Ukraine, they had heard what Trump had said during the election, and they had heard it in the context of what they knew about Donald Trump already. And that is, yeah, Donald Trump says lots of crazy stuff. We don't think he's going to completely abandon Ukraine and let us get taken over by Russia, because it would probably lead to an even wider war, and he's smart enough to know that. So what they did say was, we hope that Donald Trump will, number one, raise energy prices, and that will help defeat Russia economically. We hope that he will go to Russia and say, you're going to sit down at the negotiating table and we're going to come up with an end to this war right now, or I will set loose the Ukrainian military and take all of the restrictions off of them in terms of what they can do with the weapons we've given them. And I will lower the price of oil globally, and that will hurt you even further. And I will impose sanctions on the sanctions that are on you already, and sanctions on people who are helping you get around the sanctions. Oh, and we will start to sink your ghost fleet of ships that you have sailing around the globe, delivering oil in contravention of the sanctions against you. Stuff like that. That's what the Ukrainians are hoping for. That's the best case scenario. Their worst case scenario is that he comes in and negotiates a settlement where the Ukrainians lose at the very least, the portion of their country, the 20% of their country that Russia currently controls, but at least they will have a stop to the fighting. Vladimir Zelensky himself has already admitted that the only real outcome, the only real way that Ukraine is going to get back any of their territory is through negotiation, not by fighting, because they're currently very slowly losing a war of attrition. When I say very slowly, I mean at the rate that Russia is taking over Ukraine, it will take them more than 60 years to accomplish that goal at the loss of more than 30 million Russian troops. That's the rate that they're progressing in Ukraine right now. And the Ukrainians just opened a new offensive in the Kursk region. We're not really sure how it's going yet, but if they manage to take a little more ground, that's just more bargaining power for them to get back at least part of Kherson province or Zaporizhia province in, I say province, they're called oblasts in Ukraine. Now, I saw a question go by real quick. Why is Joe Biden handing out medals to all of his buddies? Well, I think he's handing them out to his donors as a thank you for being donors. He's just greasing the skids for the next run by the Democratic Party. That's all he's doing with these medals, and he's cheapening the medals by a darn sight. I mean, terrible thing, but we got bigger problems to worry about. Now, let's go back and talk about what he said about Hamas. And I want to play for you a portion of that. So let me see if I remembered how to get that up. Hang on.
All hell must be paid if
There we
they
go.
don't release the hostages.
Well, do I have to define it for you? Look, all hell will break out. If those hostages aren't back, I don't want to hurt your negotiation. If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East. And it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone. All hell will break out. I don't have to say anymore, but that's what it is. And they should have given them back a long time. They should have never taken them. There should have never been the attack of October 7th. People forget that.
So this is Donald Trump. That was, by the way, my friend John Huddy, I believe, asking the question. Hey, can you please clarify what you meant when you said that all hell would break out if the hostages are not released by the time he takes office? And Trump said, how much clearer do I have to be? I said, all hell is going to break out. And I meant it. It's going to break out. It's definitely going to break out. I don't want to, jeopardize the negotiations, but trust me, it's going to break out. Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because what could Trump actually do more than is being done already? Would Trump send troops into Gaza? I don't think so. He's been pretty reticent to do that in the past. If anything, he would perhaps send in some special forces troops to work with the IDF and to assist them at searching for the hostages and trying to rescue them. But he was not any clearer in his answer than he was before, because he just repeated what he had said previously. All hell will break out if the hostages are not released. What's he going to do? Bomb Gaza any more than it's already been bombed? I don't know that would do any good. It certainly would not get more hostages released. It's just going to kill more people. Likely, many of them or some of them will be the hostages that he's trying to get released. So what he's trying to do is he's blustering here to try to get Hamas to the negotiating table. And it's working to some extent. Trump himself, um, the better thing that he could do in terms of ratcheting up the pressure on Gaza would be to allow, if not encourage, the IDF to close the border of Gaza and not allow any aid into Gaza until the hostages are released, and ramp up because Gaza would run out of food in a matter of days. So in probably under a week or two at the most, Hamas or the Gazans would probably start offering up these hostages if it looked like we're going to starve you to death until you release our hostages. Now, I'm not sure how effective that would be, because what we've seen is that Hamas would much rather sacrifice its own people than give up any of the hostages. So they're perfectly happy if all their people starve to death. Hamas will be the last ones standing if they actually employed something like that. And the international opprobrium that would be leveled against Israel and the United States if they did something like that would be unbelievable, and would, without a doubt, harm the United States' ability to negotiate for anything. We would likely see sanctions on the United States from around the world. Jacob Campbell asks, Trump might exaggerate, but doesn't the canal span the entire land mass? So how are so many people crossing the canal to come to the United States if Panama wasn't allowing it? Well, Panama has been allowing it because the United States wanted them to allow it. The new president of Panama, so just to, help you make your point, Jacob, that's a good question. The canal does span the entire landmass, but you could swim it. I could swim it. It's not very wide. It's if you were walking across the canal itself, it would take you about 60 seconds or less to walk across. Okay, in some places. Now, that's in the narrow spots. Of course, in the middle of the country where the canal is wider, it's just a giant lake, and that you're not going to swim across. That's a very, very big lake. But there are 3 bridges across the canal. And yes, the migrants who are walking into Panama in the east. Now, a lot of people think Panama goes north-south. It actually goes east-west. And the canal goes north-south. So on the east is Colombia. On the west is Costa Rica, right? So they're coming in from Colombia, crossing illegally through the Darian Gap. They don't leave the Darian Gap before as soon as they make it to the first road, they are boarded on buses. And then the buses drive them to Costa Rica and drop them off. Now, the Panamanian government has been allowing this, or even facilitating this, for 2 reasons. Number one, the United States encouraged them to do so under the Biden administration. And number 2, the Panamanians certainly cannot support the number of people that are coming through. The number of people coming through the Darien Gap last year amounted to about 1/4 of the entire population of Panama. So to grow your country by 25% by illegal immigrants would be a death sentence for Panama. They can't do that. They cannot keep all these people in Panama, so they have to pass them on. But it would have never gotten to the point where it was that big if the Biden administration had not thrown open the southern border and allowed them to come in. Point, period, end of story. That's all you need to know about that. Okay. So Diane Britson said, isn't it cheaper to get those illegal migrants out? Get them out of what, Diane? I'm not sure what you mean by that. You confused me there. Mama Marissa says, question, how does Panama make their money? Well, About 40% of the Panamanian government budget comes from the canal. Yes. They actually used to make as much money from uh, Panamanian corporations as they did from the canal, but that got shut down during the Biden administration because you used to be able to go open a bearer share corporation in Panama, which was a little rare and very, very valuable for lots of things, not just criminality, but it certainly was valuable for criminals to have bearer share corporations. A bearer share corporation is just a corporation where the articles of incorporation are written in such a way that whoever holds them in their hands, whoever physically uh, uh, possesses the articles of incorporation is the owner of the corporation. So if I'm holding the articles of incorporation, I'm the owner. If I hand them to you, you're the owner because the articles say whoever holds these papers is the owner of the company. Why would you do that? Well, makes it very anonymous. There is no name on the company, no person's name on the company, and the company is an entity just like a person. And so you could buy and sell that company, and there's no name to attribute it to. So whatever is happening in that company is anonymous. A lot of rich people had these in the United States. They would have Panamanian bearer share corporations because if you own a yacht, for example, and you sell that yacht in the United States, there's a luxury tax of about 11%. So if it's a $4 million yacht, that is a $500,000 bill you just got, a tax bill for selling it. But if you go open a bearer share corporation in Panama for $1,500 and then make the yacht the sole asset of that corporation, and then you want to get rid of your yacht, you don't sell the yacht. You just sell the corporation for $4 million. And its transfer is as easy as me handing a piece of paper to you, you handing me a check, and it's all done. Nobody knows. Nobody knows who the owner is. If you're Bill Gates and you wanted to, own an island or um, a yacht or an airplane or something like that, all you had to do was buy or get a bearer share corporation, put the asset as the sole asset of that corporation, and then nobody could know who owned it. And you might say, well, that's nefarious. Not necessarily. If in today's litigious environment, if Bill Gates, for example, well, everybody hates Bill Gates. Let's say Elon Musk. If Elon Musk lands his airplane at a small airstrip somewhere in Texas in order to have a meeting with somebody there, what happens to people like that? I know this from experience. We used to have it happen to us when I was flying helicopters for the Army. The Army is very wealthy, obviously, it's the U.S. government. So what happens is Elon Musk lands his plane at this remote airstrip, and the farmers who live around the airstrip will go out and slaughter one of their cattle out on their range somewhere, or two or three of them out in one of their pastures, and then they'll call the airport and say, "Hey, that expensive, fancy private jet that just landed, it came in too low, and the noise scared my cattle, and they ran through the fence and died, and I'm going to take them to court over it." Well, if Elon Musk had to fight all of the lawsuits that are levied against him, he would probably spend most of his time and money fighting those lawsuits. So a lot of these lawsuits just get settled for some, in Musk's case, paltry amount of money. So this rancher has his uh, lawyer contact Musk's lawyers and say, look, we're filing a suit against you for $8 million for pain and hardship and suffering for us and our cattle. because your jet flies in here too much and it's too loud and whatever. However, we'll settle for $30,000 or $300,000 or whatever. And the lawyers settle out of court for some, amount of money that's less than the legal fees would have been otherwise. And it's over. And this guy just made $30,000 on a $1,000 cow. Do you see how that works? Like I said, this used to happen when I was in the Army. We would fly helicopters in training. I was flying helicopters around Madison, around Wisconsin, when I was in college for the National Guard. And this happened all the time. We'd fly into some little airstrip, or we'd fly low doing some military training, or we'd go land in a field somewhere or something like that. And the airfield would get a phone call from the owner of the land saying, you damaged something, you killed some of my livestock, you caused us pain and hardship, something, something, something. We're going to sue. We want money. A lot of times they just get paid off to go away. And so in our hyper litigious environment, that kind of bearer share corporation, or some sort of anonymity that's afforded by opening a company in another country, is actually a smart thing to do for a lot of people, not just the wealthiest people on the planet. So yes, it's used by quite a few criminals the Panama Papers proved that. But that is one of the reasons why people used to open corporations in Panama. Well, they had to shut all that down under the Obama administrations, because the Obama administration threatened to blacklist Panama and basically sanction them financially. And so they just shut the whole thing down, and that cost Panama a lot. So yeah, about 40% of Panama's government's budget comes from the canal. The canal employs about 11,000 people in Panama. Those people would likely refuse to work if the United States just went in and took over the canal. And so we might get the canal back by doing that, by militarily taking over the canal. By the way, Donald Trump did not rule out the possibility of using military force to take back the Panama Canal. Again, he's not going to do it. But if he did, we'd get the canal, but it wouldn't be worth anything, because all of the 11,000 employees would walk off the job. They're all Panamanians, you see. They have to be. Now, the United States could maybe bring in some people and eventually learn how to run the canal again, but it would be closed for some period of time. Would not surprise me if the existing employees sabotaged it on the way out the door, in which case they would get a giant hole in the ground that wouldn't actually be good. See, a lot of people, and a lot of you, I know from my responses that I get in my email, a lot of you have a misunderstanding, a fundamental misunderstanding about the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal is not a sea level canal. Ships don't just sail through the canal like it's just a gap in the land where the oceans meet, and you can just sail right through there. That's not how it works. There's about a 150-foot rise between the sea level on both sides and the lake that's in the center of the country, which forms the majority of the canal. And to move ships up 150 feet and back down 150 feet, they have to go through a series of complicated locks. Those locks are, well, complicated. And the only people left who know how to run them are Panamanian. Because any Americans who ever ran the locks of the canal are likely almost dead, because we haven't run the canal in more than 30 years. So, yeah, well, the canal is fed by two lakes, but one of the lakes actually makes up a good portion of the canal. Okay. So, if the United States people think, oh, it'd be easy, we'll just go take over the land around the canal, take over the canal, and then our ships can just go through for free. It's not how it works. It's a lot more complicated than that. And again, don't forget that the majority of the tonnage that goes through the canal today goes through the Neomax portion of the canal. That's the new canal that Panama built with its own money starting in 2008 and finishing in 2016. They built a much larger section of locks on both ends that go through the canal that the United States has never run and did not build. So if we were to go take over the canal, it'd be like if I sold, let's say I sold a my an old house that I had to somebody, and it was an old kind of broken down house. I didn't really want it. So I sold it to them for $10,000. Then they came in and over 30 years' time, they invested a lot of their own money and time and effort in designing and improving, designing improvements on that house to the point where it was unrecognizable 30 years later. It's a completely different house. And then I said, wow, that's a pretty profitable house there. You got there, turned it into a vacation rental, did you? That's nice. I'm going to go take that back. I mean, I built that house. Well, no, you did not build that house the way that it stands today. You might have built the original house that stood on that piece of property, but you did not build the house that is there today. And so if the current owner, if it's, worth $200,000 now, you don't have a right to go back in and say, well, I built the original $10,000 house that was on that lot, so I'm going to take it back. You just don't. And again, I don't think Donald Trump has any intention of taking back the canal. He's just anchoring. He's anchoring the discussion in a way that if there ever were some eventual negotiations between Panama and the United States, that he would have already pulled his opponent closer to his position and he'll get a better deal for the American people. And I think that's not a bad thing. Okay. So that's all I've got for today. Thank you for watching the Hot Zone. I hope you enjoyed it. Please share it and like it with your friends and go to chuckholton.com. We've got a lot coming. By the way, I'm going to be going to Colombia the 17th through the 20th of February in order to visit with the girls that you have helped us support for several years now. There are about 25 people we're supporting down there, kids, boys and girls, and some single mothers. And we're going to go down and check on them, make sure that they're doing okay, and try to improve their situation a little bit more and try to help them map out a strategy to really get to the next place in their life, to improve their lives. So it's kind of like a mission trip. I don't really like calling it a mission trip, but it's kind of like one. If you would like to go, we can take a couple of people with us, not many, and it's super cheap. $800. You get yourself to Cartagena, and $800 covers everything, lodging and food and transportation while you're there. I will take care of everything, and you'll get a chance to really bless some people if you're interested in going. We're going to take a very, very small group, and I'm talking about one van load max. Okay, so very small. So if you are interested in going, just contact me. Send an email to info@holtonnews.com, info@holtonnews.com, and or just to my email address, and I will get you the information about it, and we'll get you on the trip. Somebody just asked, Kayla Barnes said, are they still in jail then? Two of the mothers are still in jail, and have a hearing now on the 10th of January, hopefully to get released. I'm hoping that they will have been released by the time we get there so that we can help them get on their feet and get kind of rebuilding their lives. Okay. All right. God bless you. Also, we have a trip going to Armenia on the 6th through the 17th of June. If you would like to go along with us, we're going to take a much bigger group there. Linda Moses said, did China finance the rebuilding? No, they did not. Panama financed it out of operating capital. Actually, surprisingly enough, the Panamanians have made the Panama Canal far more profitable than it ever was when the Americans had it. One of the reasons Jimmy Carter gave it up was because it really was not profitable at all to the United States while the United States had it, and the Panamanians have made it profitable in the intervening 30 years. So, all right, God bless you. Take care. We'll see you next time.